Madam, today my topic of presentation is evolution of man from Darwin to genomics. So our goal or the learning objectives in this topic is, by the end of the session, what we will come to know that are the understand the evolutionary basis of the disease, explain the evolutionary mismatch in lifestyle disorders like NCD, non-communicable disease, discuss how the modern medicine alters the natural selection, describe the antimicrobial resistance as evolutionary pressure, and recognize the microbe as a co-evolved ecosystem. Evolution and Darwinism. At the beginning of the evolution, at first the name that comes in our mind, that is Charles Darwin. There is the picture of the Charles Darwin and the beautiful quotation of him. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So if you don't adapt, then you will extinct. So evolution is the process of the species changing over generations, sharing common ancestors. Darwinism, the theory that states all species of organisms arise and develop through the natural selection of small inherited variations that increase the individual's ability to compete, survive, and reproduce. The broad concept of transmutation of species or of evolution, which gained scientific acceptance after Darwin published On the Origin of Species book. The evolution term is coined by biologist Thomas Henry Huxley. Now, what is the natural selection? The natural selection is a mechanism of evolution. It ensures that only the traits that help a species survive and reproduce get passed on to the future generations. Now, there are three concepts, that is the survival of the fittest, natural selection, and the evolution. There is a two worms is seen in the picture, one is green and the one is blue. The survival of the fittest, which will the most evolved or which is the most adapt in the nature, that will be the uh, that will be existed in the future. That is the survival of the fittest concept. And the natural selection is the broader spectrum of the survival of the fittest. That is the natural selection is survival of the fittest on a larger scale. It involves the entire population. And evolution is the consequence of natural selection over the thousands of years. Here is the only green worms are existed. That means it is selected as only green worms, and that is the evolved and reproduce, and the green worms are increased in number. That is the natural selection in the broad spectrum, and the evolution occurred. Now, why evolution still matters in medicine? The evolution explains the persistence of the non-optimal anatomy like appendix, that is the no function in our today's uh, time, but still present, allergies and autoimmunity. These are the example. Now, susceptibility of the chronic diseases, rapid pathogen adaptation, and the variable drug responses are present. Evolution explains this. And clinical insight of this, there is the many diseases are maladaptive expressions of once beneficial traits. Like anxiety helps in the performance, but if it is persistent so much that leads to the some psychiatric disorder like anxiety disorder, depression, attention deficit, hyperactive disorder, ADHD, etc. Now, evolutionary trade-offs. There are some features of the traits that helps in our disease pathology, that helps in our disease pathology, but there are some clinical cost in case of that. Like fever is beneficial, like it inhibits the growth of the pathogen, but when this fever is rise too much, that there will be the thermoregulation will be disrupted in our hypothalamus, so there will be the organ stress will be there. Like example, inflammation, it will help in the tissue repair, but when it is the chronically coming the inflammation, there could be the chronic diseases like atherosclerosis. The next example is the insulin resistance. Insulin resistance commonly occurs, most commonly physiologically occurs in the pregnancy, where the insulin resistance occurs for energy consumption, and this energy will be going to the fetus. But Whenever this insulin resistance is much more prominent for the many time long duration, there will be the clinical cost will be the type 2 diabetes mellitus. In pregnancy there will be the gestational diabetes mellitus, and the clinical cost, another thing is the obesity. Now another example is a sickle trait. We know that sickle trait helps in protection for malaria, but there will be the clinical cost. The sickle trait leads to hemolytic anemia easily. Now, clinical relevance of this evolutionary trade-off is not all malfunctions are pathological, some are adaptive responses. Now, evolutionary mismatch theory. Now, human genomes are evolved for the high physical activity, low caloric availability, natural diets like rich fiber-rich diet, and short life expectancy. But in modern exposure, there is the sedentary lifestyles, excess calorie with processed food, and there will be this chronic psychological stress. That's why it causes a result that is a non-communicable disease. Next is the evolutionary mismatch disorders in internal medicine. The disorders that commonly occurs due to the evolutionary mismatch, which I have discussed in the previous slide, that are the example like hypertension, type 2 diabetes, coronary artery disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, osteoarthritis, and metabolic syndromes. So the pathophysiology is the adaptive metabolic pathways now operate in a maladaptive environment. Now, what are the therapeutic implications? Now, pharmacotherapy alone is insufficient. There are the evidence-based interventions. There's the, we need to do structure, exercise, dietary modification, lifestyle modification should be done, sleep optimization, that is the adequate sleep 7 hours at least, stress management, preventive cardiology like do ECG and the check whatever the parameters are not compatible, and then do the proper checkup. So evolution informed medicine is the holistic approach of the preventive therapy, lifestyle modification, and associated with the pharmacotherapy. Now, natural selection in pre-medical era. Here I have the given a picture. There is a mutation creates the variation, but the unfavorable mutation, that is the not selected by the nature. So the which are selected in the process, they are reproduced, and then again mutation occurs, that will be the extinct, and the only selected generations, selected species will be evolved, and they will be selected. So survival depends on the infection resistance, how much a person, or how much a person is, there will be the infection resistant or physical robustness and the reproductive fitness. Whenever there will be the high infection resistance, high physical robustness or reproductive fitness, there will be the survived. So that's why in pre-medical era there was the high mortality, strong selection pressure, and short lifespan. But now in ICU era, there the selectivity is very high, and the modern medicine enables the survival of the premature neonates, genetic disorders, organ failure, chronic diseases. For there I have put a picture. There is the Agrobacterium tumefaciens. So here is just given a picture of the plasmid, that is a genetically engineered gene of interest has incorporated, and the need of the what plant we require, what characteristics we require, that are incorporated through the plasmid to the gene, and incorporated in the cell, and it reproduce. So whatever features we needed, that will be come. So recombinant technology is mentioned. So in the selection of in the ICU era, it is the selection pressure is now technologically mediated. Is evolution still relevant? Yes, but genetic evolution is slower. Now the technological evolution is dominating, I have mentioned in the previous slide. Now healthcare access influences the survival more than genetics. So modern fitness is the health system plus health policy and the healthcare access. This together, all three holistic approach is needed for the uh, life. Now, some ethical and clinical dimensions in this case. There's genetic screening, assisted reproduction, resource allocation, end of life care. There are some ethical and the clinical dimensions and the health inequities. So evolution now intersects with the ethics and policy. Now come to the antimicrobial resistance AMR. Antimicrobial resistance is the Darwinian selection in microbes. So antibiotics create a selective pressure. We give the antibiotics, are uh, some bacteria are gone, so some resistant strains survive and that will spread. So it is the Darwinian selection or the natural selection in the microbes. Here I have mentioned the Kirby-Boyer plates, uh, Kirby-Boyer mechanism. There are the antibiotic uh, buttons, that is the A, B, and C antibiotic disc, and it is the agar media on the petri dish. Here is the C and B. There is a clearing occurred, that is the no bacterial growth, so zone of inhibition, but the around the A there is the bacterial growth is present, so this bacteria is resistant to the antibiotic A. So this is the naturally selected, like the Darwinian selection in microbes. So mechanisms of resistance, I have given a picture that antimicrobial resistance, there are the different types of microbial resistance like DNA mutation, selective pressure, biofilm formation, horizontal gene transfer, lack of new antibiotics, or the overuse of the antibiotics. So I have mentioned clearly one by one. So enzyme production, like example beta lactamase producing bacteria, they're destroying the penicillin, so producing the resistance. So they are selecting, naturally selected due to their resistance. So target modification, example target modification, example MRSA, methicillin resistant Staph aureus, changing its binding site, that is a mutation PBP, penicillin binding protein. That's why the resistance occurs. Now reduce drug accumulation via efflux pumps, drug accumulation reduced. Example chloroquine resistant malaria. So malaria parasites efflux the chloroquine drug, that's why the resistance occurs. Now, biofilm formation. Example is the Staph epidermidis, Staphylococcus epidermidis, tolerating the vancomycin within their protective biofilms. That's why resistance occurs. And horizontal gene transfer. Example is the Staph aureus gains phage-mediated transduction, creating the superbugs like MRSA. Now, the drivers of antimicrobial resistance. Drivers of antimicrobial resistance, that they are the empirical overuse of the antibiotics. That's why the resistance is occurring. There's the incomplete course, that is the very much common in our society. There's taking the antibiotic and not completing the course. Whenever they are getting suspecting they are cured, they individually by himself or herself stops the antibiotic. Thereby the antimicrobial resistance is occurring. Now broad spectrum misuse is there. It is another cause. Agricultural antibiotics are used so much to inhibit the insects and the microbes in the agricultural field. Poor infection control is another thing. So clinical consequences, there will be the, that's why the clinical consequences are the multi-drug resistance or the extreme drug resistant infections, sepsis occurring, there's a mortality is going on, limited therapeutic options in case of the high resistance MDR, XDR, increased ICU burden. So antimicrobial resistance, so antimicrobial resistance is a major threat to modern medicine. Now stewardship as an evolutionary control. There are some strategies to reduce the antimicrobial resistance, like culture guided therapy, de escalation of the antimicrobials, narrow spectrum use at first, then depend on the culture sensitivity report, then you escalate the antimicrobial, do the surveillance properly. Infection prevention is the most important thing. But there are some challenges in interpreting or implementing the stewardship. There are some time constraints, lack of the departmental intercoordination, minimal supporting facilities, poor enforcement of the regulations, utility value of the antibiogram, and competition among doctors, absence of champion, and so on. So at first we must treat the infection without selecting for the resistance. If culture sensitivity report comes, then we go for the broad spectrum antibiotic and so on. Now for the, as my topic is the Darwin to genomics, there is the obviously comes the topic the human microbiome. So humans are the meta-organisms because there are the so much bacteria and the microbiomes are present in our body, the gut or any system. So there is the gut microbiome. There's a metabolism of many things. It is interlinked there. There is the gut-brain axis. We are commonly associated with this term. There is the behavior, motor activity. Everything is associated in the gut microbiome system. Energy metabolism, fat metabolism in the liver, hepatic steatosis. All things are associated with the gut microbiome. So diet, gut stereo, gut health is everything associated with this. So microbes contribute in the immunity, metabolism, drug metabolism, and our neurobehavior. So co-evolution with microbes. Microbiota evolved alongside the humans, training immune tolerance, preventing the pathogen colonization, and supporting digestion. So loss of microbial diversity, it will increase the disease risk. Now, what is the dysbiosis in the clinical medicine? Dysbiosis. There is the gut dysbiosis. If the bacterial flora in the gut is disrupted, there will be so much diseases will occur. There can be the cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis. There will be the neurobehavior disorder like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, depression, anxiety. Now, there can be the obesity, type 2 diabetes. Now, gut problems like inflammatory bowel disease, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. So associated with the dysbiosis associated with IBD, obesity, diabetes, allergies, depression, autoimmune disorders, etc. Now clinical applications of this microbiome. So I have mentioned the numerous things like for bacterial therapies it is used, microbiome modulation like we most commonly use the probiotics, then fecal microbiota transplant in recurrent Clostridium difficile infection. Microbiome was also used in the breast cancer, like engineered non-pathogenic salmonella targets and destroy the tumor cells within the hypoxic tumor microenvironment. Diet-based microbiome modulation is there. Nuclear imaging is also there in use of the microbes. Radio leveled, radioactive gallium leveled antibacterials for whole body imaging of bacterial metabolic activities. It is also used. So microbiome is our future therapeutic target. Now, genomics and evolution. Genomics allows the disease susceptibility mapping, pharmacogenomics, pathogen tracking, precision medicine. So evolutionary biology guides the interpretation of genomic data. So the summary, disease reflects the evolutionary history, lifestyle diseases, lifestyle diseases there is due to the product of evolutionary mismatch disorders, and ICU medication alters selection, and antimicrobial resistance is evolution in action. Microbiome is a co-evolved organ. Next is the final message. Evolutionary medicine improves clinical reasoning, enhances the prevention strategies, and prepares us for future challenges. Thank you.